So how does the slot anatomy look like in a post-EPBS and fossil world? This is the short answer. It looks really, really nice because the two actually fit quite well together. The slightly longer answer is what we are going to get into in this presentation. Okay, so slot anatomy. Like this like what happens in slot n-1 is actually like very, very easy for you guys to sort of grasp because it's fossil. Like so yeah, you'll notice I'll talk about like different parts of what's happening in different slots in like the first diagram I'm gonna show, but still like here we can just talk about what fossil does. So imagine slot n-1, you have the includers, right? And they build and they broadcast their inclusion list on the CLP2P network. And yeah, just like fossil, normal fossil, towards the end of the slot, the attesters of slot N will freeze their views and stop storing new inclusion lists. And then a couple of seconds later, the builder and the proposer actually also stop storing new ILs. And what the builder does is like it updates its execution payload to make sure it satisfies IL conditions. And IL conditions, like you all know, are like the union of transactions across all inclusion lists are included in the payload unless the block is full. Okay, so let's say that's what happened in slot -1. Of course, like duties and stuff are actually overlapping over the duration of one slot, but I thought it would be easier to actually go through it this way. Okay, so yeah, the rest of it happens in slot N, so there is a bunch of things. One thing that happens is that the proposer will first just like run its fork choice rule to basically determine the valid parent block to build on. And that determination depends or like incorporates the PTC vote outcome for the slot n-1 payload, um, which basically determine whether the payload of slot n-1 was made available on time. And then the proposer will just like select and broadcast a beacon block that he has selected from a builder. And the selection will basically depend on like a bunch of things now. Um, First, it will depend on, of course, like the builder's bid, like the actual value specified in the, payload header. Like you want to choose the highest one. Like that's exactly like how it happened to how it happens today. It also depends on whether the IL bit list includes all the ILs that are seen by the proposer until its own like freeze deadline. So that's a new object, like that's a new field that is included in the beacon block. And so the IL bit list is basically allowing to have builders include and commit to a list of the ILs they have seen and taken into account to build their payloads. And this is basically very, very nice because it allows proposers to select blocks from builders based on the IL bit list inclusivity, let's say. And inclusivity means whether the builder's IL bit list covers all inclusion lists that are stored by the proposer before its freeze deadline. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Because then, based on the IL bit list, basically the attesters or the PTC of slot N will see like that it can be both. Like there are two possibilities of designs there. Can condition their votes based on the IL bit list inclusivity. But yeah, we can come back to this because there is like a special sort of like split IL enforcement slide. But hopefully that's clear. Does anyone have questions on the IL bit list or is it all good? Okay. So then, yeah, the attesters of slot N then will basically vote for the beacon block N again, depending on like a bunch of conditions. The first condition is like the block builds on like a valid head, according to the attester's view of the fork choice. And the fork choice rule actually incorporates again like the PTC votes from slot n minus one. Then another condition is like the payload for slot minus one actually satisfies its own IL conditions. So yeah, if the payload from slot minus one basically wasn't compliant, so like it didn't include valid inclusion list transactions in its blocks, the attesters of slot n will not vote for block n uh, because they want to like reorg the non-compliant payload n minus one. So that's like another important condition, and that's sort of like the second part of the split IL enforcement. The first part being like the IL bit list part that I just talked about before. Um, and then the last part is, I mean, there is a GA check too. And the last part is the actual IL bit list for the beacon block N. So the IL bit list in the block, yeah, that's if the attesters are actually doing that check. Like, as I said, like it could be done by the PTC too. But if attesters are doing that check, like exactly like in the diagram, then the IL bit list in the block has to include all ILs the attester was aware of at its own freeze deadline. And yeah, again, it can be done by the PTC too. And we'll go over like the difference there. Okay, so that's for the attesters, orange sort of like column there. Um, okay, and then the builder will reveal its full like payload n, and that can be done, at any time, but maybe a rule of thumb could be, for example, after having seen enough attestations for the beacon block including its payload header. That's not like enforced or anything, it's just like a rule that could be used. But there are, I mean, especially now, there's a lot more into this, like, and we can actually discuss the free option problem if you guys want later on. And then the PTC votes for payload n if the payload n is made available on time by the builder. So now we have the whole like sort of like slot structure for EPBS and FOCIL, and you see that the only thing that's added as a field is really that IL bit list in the beacon block n, which is not much. And then, you need to add a check for that IL bit list, of course. Um, and that's like the first part of the split IL enforcement. And then the second part is like the next slots attesters will actually like, verify if transactions are actually included in the payload, and if there are if there are like some missing transactions where they're missing because they were invalid, or where they're missing because I don't know, the builder was censoring or something. Yes, Mark.
So, does the PTC need to check if the IL list was respected when it votes on whether or not the payload was available?
Yeah, so that's like basically the design choice we have, and I will get into it later. It's like either done by the attesters of slot n or by the PTC. It can be both.
Okay.
Yes, Fotis?
No, neither of them would. I mean, if I understood Mark's question is about checking whether or not it was satisfied. Neither of them would actually check this. They only
No,
need
no,
to
yeah.
check if the ILs, if the bits include the bits that they needed to, that they had at their own view under freeze time.
Yes, yes. Yeah, sorry that I didn't like I misunderstood the questions. Like the full enforcement is only done by the attesters of the next slot. And the IL bit list inclusivity check can be done by either the attesters of slot n or the PTC of slot n. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. So in this case, if it wasn't, so it needs to be done also by of course, the proposer of slot N. But if the proposer builds, let's say on so if the proposer builds on the payload being available, but the payload didn't respect the IL list. The idea is that the attesters will reorg that beacon block.
Yeah.
And then if the
Yeah.
but they'll reorg that beacon block, but not the previous beacon block. It'll just be an empty.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Yeah.
see. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Right now, yeah, on this like different diagram, then I actually added like every duty that could be that has to be done for different reasons in a given slot. And so okay, so the full line duties are the ones that are like existing already. The like larger dashed boxes are EPBS related, and the smaller dashed boxes are FOCIL related. And so you can see that there is overlap between duties. But what's nice, and we'll get into this later, is like that like the order in which these duties happen doesn't really matter as long as you don't require ILs to be built on the latest head for them to be considered enforceable. So yeah, that's like one thing to remember because it's important, and I will come back to it later anyways. Yeah, so that's exactly what I was saying basically. So the first sort of like consideration is order independence. So yeah, since we don't require ILs to be built on the sort of canonical latest head of the chain to be considered enforceable, like um, then the order of these duties, especially like towards the end, doesn't really sort of matter much. But it's like still sort of like important, I think, to say that we would ideally want most of the ILs to be built on the latest head. So the ideal scenario would be to have a payload that is released before the ILs can be built. That would be actually ideal because it just means you have like fresher ILs, so inclusion lists, and that's just like better. Otherwise, you have sorry, you have a lot of different uh, yeah, you'll have a lot of different transactions that will have been included in the latest block. So you'll have like a bit of you'll have transactions in the ILs that are like not as fresh as they should be, and then that makes the ILs a bit less effective. So I think it's still important to aim for having a payload released before the ILs are built. But since it's like not an enforced thing, like it actually doesn't really matter much. And so that would have been like the biggest, I think, tension between FOSSOL and EPBS, and it turns out like it's not really one. So yeah, that's about order independence. And then yeah, I mean that's the whole split IL enforcement thing. I already talked about about it quite a bit, but like yeah, we can do like the split IL enforcement, and we can basically require builders to include and commit to the IL bit list in their blocks to indicate which inclusion lists were considered when constructing their payloads. And it's nice because yeah, it allows proposers to select blocks based on the IL bit list inclusivity check. And so, as I said, based on the IL bit list, the attesters or the BTC of slot N can condition their votes based on the inclusivity check. And so that vote basically provides like an early useful, but yeah, of course a bit incomplete because you don't go and do like the actual full check about all transactions. But it does provide like a very useful signal to the proposer regarding whether the builder's payload considered like all the ILs it should have considered. So yeah, so you can do it two ways. Like either you actually use the attesters of slot N, So yeah, the attester will just like verify whether the IL bit list matches their local frozen view before attesting. And so the primary advantage of doing it this way is like, of course, like it leverages the entire beacon committee and not a subset of it with the PTC. But it does mean that you can reorg a beacon block just because it fails to satisfy the IL bit list inclusivity check. Um, so, I mean, Francesco didn't seem to think it was as clean, but yeah, I think like both are actually like viable options. So let me go through the PTC option. Um, so you can have the, yeah, attesters like don't perform that check, the inclusivity check, I mean, and then the PTC vote actually does it. And so this approach like is a bit cleaner, like in terms of abstraction, like actually, well, just like from one angle, I guess, because it protects like the beacon chain from being reorged due to IL conditions, basically. Um, and so the beacon block will no longer be rejected just for containing a commitment to a payload with that fails like the inclusivity check of the IL bit list. And instead, like, yeah, if the builder's final payload fails the actual, final deterministic post checks, then only the payload is reorged, which is nice. Um, but the main trade-off there is that the initial inclusivity signal relies on like a smaller set of validators in a PTC rather than the entire attester committee. So we'll need to make a choice there. Like I've thought a bit about this and I still don't have like super strong opinions. So I mean, if you guys have any, let me know. Yeah, Mark.
I believe another consequence might be that even if the PTC voted against the payload, that in theory the next proposer could still build upon it. I'm not 100% on that. Maybe POTUS could shed light, but
What does it mean to vote against the payload?
oh well, to vote against the payload being available and respecting the inclusion list. You rely on the PTC for that. If we go with the PTC option of enforcing the IL, but my understanding, I could be wrong, was that it is still possible for a proposer to vote that a payload is available, even if the PTC said it wasn't.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. If the payload is available, then the proposer can build on top of it, and attesters will take their block because they can check that it was available.
Right. So then a consequence of moving the PTC enforcement to the PT, or I'm sorry, the IL enforcement to the PTC committee is that in theory it could still make it in the chain, even if it didn't respect the inclusion list. I mean,
No, it can't, because attesters do make the full enforcement. If
Yeah.
the payload does not respect the IL, the attesters for slot N will not vote on the beacon block of N that was based on that payload, because that payload could not even be in their for choice.
okay, I thought we were talking about a trade-off between enforcing it via the attesters at the next slot or the PTC of the
Ah,
current.
no, no, no. No, no. Again, like so that's why it's split. Um, and so the full enforcement will always be done by like the next slot attesters. And what we are talking about in terms of like should the PTC or the attester of slot 10 do it is only the IL bit list inclusivity check, which is just like a signal for the proposer, but doesn't, you know, it doesn't actually change what the attesters of slot N will do on the next slot. Yes, POTUS.
I think an easy way to explain this is that both this bit list, either like being on the attesters or on the PTC, they're not enforcing anything. They're
Yeah.
just signaling, and it depends on to whom they are signaling. If you put them on the attesters or on the PTC, you're always signaling to the next proposer that the payload that they might need to build on did satisfy or no, it did not satisfy their view of our choice. So the proposer already has some information that otherwise it wouldn't have. But also it might, if you put it earlier on the attesters, the builder themselves, they know already that their build, their payload was already invalid from the start.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that information is useful or not, but it's information there. But it's only a signal. It's not enforcement. The only enforcement happens in the next slot by attesters.
Yeah, and the difference is like, I mean, the other only difference is like the PTC vote only affects the payload, while the attester's vote affects like the beacon block. All right. Okay, I think it's one of the last slides, but yeah. So I think, yeah, TLDR is like the key synergy, I think, between FOCIL and ePBS revolves around the separation of the beacon block and the execution payload, because that separation basically enables to enforce IL conditions by rejecting non-compliant payloads without affecting the beacon chain stability. And I think, yeah, I think I agree to Botus, but um, this is, I think, like a big improvement over other proposals like delayed execution, um, just because you don't need to add, the static checks that come with block level access lists to make FOSL and delayed execution work. So I think that's a very big sort of like, that's like, to me, that's the most important synergy between the two proposals. And so, yeah, again, since without like that separation, you could have like a weird situation. Um, and so like a non-compliant block. So yeah, imagine without the separation, you have like this weird scenario. Like you can have like a non-compliant block, sorry, that will initially receive like the full support in slot N, but once you discover it's like non-compliant because it just like fails IL conditions, then the next proposer of slot N plus one can attempt to reorg this block with a competing block. And so basically this will lead to like two blocks. So the original non-compliant block and the competing compliant block having equal full weight. And that's just like a very weird situation to be in. And so with the separation, of course, we don't have this. Another advantage of like cleanly separating, I mean, yeah, no, that I was gonna say like it does get rid of the static checks, and that's sort of nice that you don't need like a way to get the post state values to through BALs, like through block level access lists, like because you actually, yeah, that payload beacon block execution payload separation gives you this already, which is sort of very nice, at least. And yeah, I think that was basically it. There is a bit more in the post if you want to check it out, but yeah, we can also discuss more. Yes, Potus?
Yeah, so one of my worries is on the timing. Could you say a little bit, like, could you spell out how are the timings before the start of the slot? Because the problem is that you need to have attesters freezing their view, the IL proposers sending their ILs,
Yeah.
but also, I mean, we know that in real life, most bids that will contain this bid list will happen after the start of the slot. But those bids that are over the P2P chain, they need to start before the start of the slot. So I
Mm-hmm.
think the protocol needs to, if we ever, unless we just ditch completely the P2P side, we're going to have that freeze before the start of the slot to give time to builders to actually build and broadcast their bit lists before the start of the slot. So what are the numbers that you have in your mind?
Uh, okay, so maybe here you mean, so what's the contentious one part you're talking about? Like because The
So
one part I was worried about is like the, releasing the payload before building the IL. That's like one we should be careful of.
no, so that I'm happy if we don't have like fresh ILs. That doesn't seem like a big problem to me. No,
Okay.
the problem that I see on tight deadlines, especially if we go to shorter slots,
Yeah.
is that uh, the builder for the next slot needs to build the payload before the start of the next slot.
Mm-hmm.
So the start of that build process needs to happen before second zero.
Yeah.
Okay, and that builder already needs, so that time needs to be after the deadline freeze for attesters, and it
Yes.
should have a buffer that is long enough so that that builder can actually include all of the IL bits that every attester already has.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so I mean that was the case in FOSIL as well. Yeah, you need like that bit of a leeway between. So you have the attesters deadline, and then you have the proposer or let's say builder deadline, and there needs to be a bit of a delay between the builder freeze and the start of the slot. So today it's 1 second. Um, I think it's like yeah, based on what I've seen, it's like it takes like about 100 to 200 milliseconds max to build a block today by like performance builders. Maybe yeah. I think like local builders could actually like do that quite fast too. It's also not completely, rebuilding the whole block because it's making sure to add the IL transactions you can add, but like it's not like some sort of a weird complex MEV strategy ordering. So you can like maybe estimate like that with like a big margin of error on like I don't know, like 500 milliseconds or something, and then they need to broadcast the like to send the bids and the blocks to the proposer, and the proposer needs to to pick one. Yeah, I definitely had like the 12-second slots in mind. If we go to six, I mean, I still think you can have quite a tight deadline between the builder freeze and the moment it has to broadcast its block and bids. Um, and then, there are going to be timing games, but those are like expected. So if you have timing games in a way, like you gain some time at the beginning of next slots, but it depends on the size of the payload, of course, and a bunch of other things. Yes, Mark?
So there's, yeah, so we have two deadlines here, a local IL freeze deadline and a proposer IL. So I assume the local IL is for the attesters.
Yeah,
And
it's
then
in
the idea
orange.
is that the proposer IL is really more for the builder.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
okay. And
Well, it's also for the proposer because the proposer still has to, check the builder's IL bit list and only accept if it's like
matches.
congruent with their view.
Oh, I see. Okay. And so and the gap there is very similar to like the NAV burn gap, essentially, is the way I understand it. I don't know if you that's kind of how NAV burn works as well, where you
Yeah, yeah. You have this sort of like two like deadlines as well for sure. You need
okay.
to have that. Yeah,
And so um hmm. So it's the job of the proposer to propose a block that they believe satisfies the local IL freeze deadline so that the attesters will vote for it.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, the concern here is about having enough time. I mean, we could presumably, how far back can we push both of these deadlines? Like, what's the furthest back that we could push them?
You mean like back in time?
Back into the slot, yeah. How
Uh, yeah, I think then you actually so the earlier you have to build your IL, then the less fresh it will be compared to like the release of the payload. So that's one thing we have to care about. But let's imagine we have a deadline for releasing the payload early in the slot, then it also maybe like solves a bunch of these concerns. Um, and yeah, I mean, we could push it quite far back. I actually agree because, like, building an IL is like a very unsophisticated process, and then you need to broadcast like 16 objects. Uh, like it's not a big deal. Like it will be quite fast. So like here, like it's kind of misleading. Like having this much time dedicated to like building and broadcasting ILs, that could be pushed like way far, like way like a lot more, a lot earlier. Let's say.
Well,
Uh,
but it sounded like you said you need knowledge of the post state to some, or at least the beacon block of that.
yeah,
I'm not
ideally you
getting the
want
beacon
that.
block,
Yes.
but the payload of that slot before you can broadcast an inclusion list.
I mean, you don't. That was like one of the main thing. Like you don't have to. It's just better to have fresher transactions in ILs. But like you don't need to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Like you can still make an IL with like transactions that are not as fresh and that were included in the slot that you were in, and it's fine. Like that. This should be still like enforceable and valid and everything.
Okay. So yeah, then we probably have quite a bit of headroom,
Yes.
even in the worst case. Okay.
Yeah. Exactly. Purchase.
Yeah, so the builder freeze that Terence said that it was just 1 second before the end of the slot now. That's absolutely fine now. I don't think you can make it much lower. I mean, it's never going to be a proportion of the slot. You have this fixed latency, which
Yes.
is bit propagation. And bit
Yeah.
propagation does need to come before the start of the slot, because even though you can count with timing games, honest proposers will choose the bid at second zero and
Yeah.
will just send the message at second zero.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can make it much lower than 1 second because you need bit propagation. And 1 second of 6 second slots becomes um, much tighter than what
Yeah.
it is today. So yeah, I'm just wary about the 6 second slots idea with regards to this.
I agree. I think we'll have to see. I think, but it's true that it's incompressible time basically. Like so, the time between the proposer IL and the start of the next slot is like fixed latency you can get rid of, and then the local IL freeze deadline relative to the proposer IL freeze deadline is also fixed latency because you need to have some wiggle room to make sure the proposer like doesn't by accident like not see ILs he's supposed to see, and like more than half of the attesters actually see an IL that he didn't. So if he's not that well connected, like you need to allow some time there. Yeah, we fixed it like I think it's like 9 and 11, so it's like 2 seconds. Maybe that's actually too high. Like maybe you don't need 2 seconds to have like a to make sure like a proposer will have seen all the
I,
ILs because they're
I'm
all
not worried about that part of the propagation. The other part is the one that I'm worried, from
right,
11
right.
to 0.
Okay, so yeah, but like if you can have like 1 second and still keep that 1 second and then maybe reduce like the difference between the attesters freeze deadline and the proposers to like 1 second as well, then it's 2 seconds. I don't know. Yeah, we need to see. I want to like maybe write something later about like the sort of like what happens in the 6 second slots. But yeah, we'll have to see. All right. Does anyone have other questions? Yeah, Jihun.
So there is one more deadline, actually, the IELTS submission deadline, which is 8 seconds into the slot. So I think it's better to frame this in. So testers have 1 second to gather the IELTS over the peer-to-peer network, while builders have 2 more seconds to gather it, rather than they have 1 second buffer for gathering the full IELTS bit list.
Mm, yeah.
And
I
I also
mean,
have a,
yeah.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, yeah, those are like questions that are just like a bit hard to answer before we have benchmarks. I think but I agree. Like I don't know if I actually don't know if it's gonna be like 2 seconds, 1 second. Like, will we have time? My guess is like broadcasting ILs, like propagation time for like 16 small objects, like should be fast, hopefully. Maybe we'll need to adjust the P2P network for this, but like at least with 12-second slot times, like we have so much room. Um, and then yes, you have these all these deadlines you basically need to tune. But yeah, you had the second point, I think. Sorry.
Yeah. What I'm talking about is not about the estimated IL broadcast time. I'm just talking about like timeline wise. I think it's better to say that the builder has 2 more seconds to gather ILs than a testers. And
Okay.
yeah, I have one question, but I guess Potas want to say something related to this, so I guess I can go next. So yeah, Potas, please go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to mention an attack that I don't know how can it be solved. So the situation goes like this. You said that the IL propagation time is currently at 8 seconds. And the first reaction that I have is that you can make it very earlier because the payload, we're going to force it to be available quite earlier.
Right.
But here's the problem. How do we prevent the following situation? There is one transaction that I want to censor because it's going to be rugging the full rollup. Now I see that transaction in every single IL. I include it in my payload. I win the auction. I include it in the payload. And the DA for that payload happens always at the very end of the slot. So that's what we want to do if we want to actually have this propagation of blobs. And then I withhold the blobs as in these attacks of like the free option problem. So then every IL, the whole point of this is that the PTC deadline for DA would happen after IL broadcast because we want to have this PTC as late as possible. So by the time that the PTC votes, signaling that the payload is actually not available, the data is not available, the ILs are already out, and the ILs, if they are built on top of the payload, of the execution of the payload, they will not include this transaction because they see it included in the payload.
Mm,
So I mean, the question is, will IL broadcasters include this transaction or not? They cannot have the payload in their for choice yet because they haven't. I mean, some of them might have it if they see it available. Some of them might not. So the question is, how do IL proposers choose their transactions without having data availability chosen yet?
okay. So yeah, first thing is like, at least to me, the selection of transactions from includers is just based on the mempool. Originally, like they will run, they'll get the latest head they have, and then they will just like include transactions from the mempool.
Right. So, but the problem is that now they see a payload that includes the transactions that they have in the mempool. They can see the payload. They can even execute the payload, but they cannot still import it because they don't know if the data is available or not. So if they do their own sampling and their own sampling tells them this payload is available,
Yeah.
then they will not include a transaction that is being actually censored because they see the payload as available, they see the transaction being included,
Mm,
they will not submit that transaction in the IL, but still the payload would revert because it's not available.
yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean. Okay. Yeah, we need to think about this. Um,
So I
I
think
think it's
it's
fine
fair
if the
to
committee is long enough, right? Because if the committee is large enough, at least one member of the committee will not have sampled that payload, will not have been able to import it, and will still include that transaction.
yeah. And then, so what's the worst case will be that transaction is not included in ILs, for this slot, but it will be on the next slot, right?
No, because if it's not included in this slot, then the next payload advances the chain, and then it's going to be again in the IL for the next slot, and then the builder can play the game again, can win the auction again
Right.
in the
Okay.
next block, and then the gas is not really increasing because we're having like one full block and one empty block.
Yeah. Yeah, I need to think about this more, I think. But it's interesting. It will mean we would, yeah, because then you have like a bit of an issue, like because like okay, like if you don't sort of like talk about attacks, then you want sort of like the IL, like the includers to build their ILs based on the payload they see, right? Like you sort of want this. Um,
Yeah, I think that the main difference here is that the IL it can never really be fresh because today with FOCIL, like this is the biggest interaction with EPBS with FOCIL as far as
yeah,
I can see, which is today with FOCIL, when you're building your IL, you already know the validity, the full validity of the payload,
yeah.
DA and execution. But in EPBS, you're gonna build your inclusion list without knowing the DA of the payload. And I think that's what needs to be researched. And we need to have like enough includers so that if the payload, even if the payload is not available, then they will include transactions that were included in the payload. And then some includers will just re-include them.
Yeah. Terence?
Right. So even today, like the notion of the IL does not dependent on the concept of a pairing hash, right? Because if you look at the inclusion list, there is no field that says a pairing hash. Today I can import a IL into P2P and broadcast it without knowing the pairing hash. And basically all it matters is that IL can be executed at the end of the block if it's otherwise it's not satisfiable. So that kind of makes it easier to reason here, I guess. I guess the only question is that today to build the IL, you ask the execution client to build the IL, that you need to input the parent block hash, which maybe we don't need to do that for the engineering API. That's probably something to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that sounds good. Okay. Yeah, we can think about it more, but maybe it could also. Okay, so it's completely impossible to imagine having the PTC vote before uh, building the IL. That would be
Yeah, because the
that would be moving
latencies that
it
are
too much.
involved are much larger, right? So the PTC only needs one small message to reach the proposer,
Yeah.
while the ILs need like all of the freeze deadline, the freeze for the builder, the bit broadcasting, and all of this.
Yeah. That will move. Basically, you would lose too much time in terms of propagation time. That makes sense. Okay, cool. Yeah, well, definitely good to think about for sure. And I'll try to come back to you with something. Cool. Anything else we have? We don't have that much time left, but does anyone have any questions? We can just maybe focus on this. Yes, Jihun?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I just missed this, but my question is the full IL enforcement by a testers done based on the IL bit list or their subjective IL view?
So the no, it's based on their subjective IL view. The signal given by the IL bitlist inclusivity check is just for the proposer. The attesters will just do like the full sort of like deterministic post checks according to their own views, I think.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Anything else? Okay. So yeah, I mean the second thing on the agenda was to talk about Glamsterdam and have a temperature check. I don't know if we need to go into much detail. I think like if you missed it, like EPBS, FOCIL, and 6 second slot times are like still sort of like being considered for the headliner choice. Yeah, maybe what I wanted to say is like the sort of scope and feasibility aspect comes up a lot about like, for example, doing EPBS and FOSL. But it comes up a lot from like people that are not like CL devs, to be honest. So, and I've told them that. So it will be nice, I think, if you've worked on either of them or both, and you have an opinion about whether it's possible or not, or how much of a delay it will be, to either voice it or I don't know, just like you can do it here, you can do it to me, you can talk to Jihoon, you can do it on ACD, but like I think it would be nice to have like clear opinions from devs that are actually looking at the code and that have sort of like started implementing these features to give an opinion on this. And yeah, other than this, I think it's also nice if you haven't checked the Glamsterdam sort of like feedback thing on It Magicians. And yes, I agree. I asked Terence first. But yeah, if you haven't checked the Glamsterdam, what is it, like feedback thing for okay, I don't remember how it's called. But like basically there is a page, yeah, soliciting stakeholder feedback on Amsterdam. This is here. And you have like a bunch of people that are like cheering for FOSL there, so that's kind of cool. And it's also nice. I feel, at least to me, it was nice to see how also like informed like each member of the community or was on like the process, and I feel like it would be nice to have continued more informed takes about what people want to see. But yeah, I thought it was fun. And yeah, does anyone have comments on Amsterdam generally? If not, it's perfect. In terms of time, we are at the hour. And yeah, thanks a lot, all of you, for attending, and see you soon.
Bye bye. Thanks.